Now, the engine can be reinstalled. To do this, the engine unit should be suspended in as horizontal a position as possible. When inserting the engine unit into the engine compartment, ensure that the heat shields, lines and cables are not damaged. The gearbox mountings give a good indication of whether the engine unit has reached the correct installation position. The engine mountings center themselves automatically using a pin that is inserted through these bores. Secure the engine mountings on the left and right. Then, tighten the threaded connection for the gearbox mounting on the left and right. Next, remove the fixture and fit the bracket for the connector of the clutch position sender. The engine gearbox wiring harness is then fed into the vehicle interior. When threading the harness through, make sure that no plugs or cables are damaged. Fit the rubber sleeve for the wiring harness all the way around. In our example, we again briefly disconnected the breather line to the fuel filler neck in order to create more space for assembly. When plugging the breather line back in, ensure that the connector engages correctly. Finally, check that it is fitted correctly. The engine control units are returned to their correct positions. The wiring harness is placed back underneath the side panel and connected. The earth wires on the left and right are then screwed onto the earth welding points. Caution! The cable shoes to the earth wires must not come into contact with the weld seams for the earth point. The next step is to position and fix the engine gearbox wiring harness on the left-hand side. These areas, wrapped in fabric, are mounting points. These points show where the wiring harness must be attached in order to ensure that it is fitted correctly. Install secondary air pump 1. When assembling the fuel supply line, please note the following. To achieve the required press force for the conical seal using specified torque, the thread of the threaded connection must be oiled. Caution! When tightening the union nut, the fuel rail must be counterheld without fail. If not, there is a risk of the soldered connection on the fuel rail being damaged and leaking as a result. Please also observe the correct torque. Mount the vacuum line that leads to the brake servo. Install the coolant expansion tank. Next, connect the ACF line. When attaching the line, take particular care in ensuring that the quick-release coupling engages correctly. Pull on the coupling several times to make sure that it is fitted correctly. Ensure that the hoses and clamps are fully attached and that they are in the correct position. At this point, the pipe hose assembly leading from the engine oil cooler to the oil reservoir is ready for installation. The installation procedure is the same as those for previous pipe hose assemblies. Carefully clean the assembly and check that the connections are free of any signs of corrosion. Next, connect the hydraulic line to the power steering. Once again, oil the thread at this point. Before tightening, secure the line leading to the body. Normally, each line bears an assembly mark showing its correct installation position in relation to the other. If the marks are missing, before tightening the union nut, apply the marks to the lines when they are pre-mounted and not connected to the power supply. Caution: when tightening the union nut, make sure that the lines do not become twisted. The connection must be dry after assembly in order to ensure that you can check the connection for leaks. Next, fit the pipe hose assembly onto the oil cooler carrier. As oil emerges at this point, once the plug has been removed, the first step is to wipe this up. As you would expect, the next step is to replace the O-ring and lubricate it using engine oil. Caution: when attaching the assembly, there is a risk that the assembly may become misaligned and the O-ring may be damaged. Make sure that the pipe connection is pushed in by hand up to the stop. The connection must not be secured by tightening the fastening screw. This area must be carefully cleaned in order to later check for any leaks. The refrigerant reservoir can then be reattached in its old position. When mounting the refrigerant line, use refrigerant compressor oil to lubricate the new O-ring. Then install the oil reservoir. When connecting the pipe hose assembly, it is once again important to ensure that the connection has been pushed up to the stop before tightening the screws. Finally, ensure that everything is completely clean. Next, the crossmember is installed. The 4 aluminium screws must be replaced and the shims must be reinstalled in the correct position. The aluminium screws must be tightened using a specified torque and then using a defined turning further angle. The electronic torque and turning further angle wrench BAS 6583 is particularly well suited for this task. Alternatively, you can work with a conventional torque wrench. Marks help to establish the correct turning further angle. The vacuum reservoir for the exhaust flap control unit is then returned to its position. The engine gearbox wiring harness is reattached to the crossmember. This is the mounting point where the wiring harness is secured using a clamp. When installing the reservoir for the power steering, make sure that both lines are fully attached and that the O-type clips are correctly positioned. Next, make sure that everything is completely clean and dry. Mount the lines leading to the engine breather onto the oil reservoir and secure to the crossmember. Fix the R-tronic breather line to the holder. Connect the secondary air hose. Next, the hoses in the wiring harness are secured to the crossmember. The anti-roll bar can then be installed. Caution: the bonded rubber bushes of the coupling rods must not be tightened until the relevant axle side has first been brought into the unladen position. To do this, fit fixture T10149 as shown here. To produce a more accurate measurement, we have drawn in the axle center for the 112mm bolt circle. Using tensioning straps T10038, secure the vehicle using the engine and gearbox jack to ensure that the vehicle does not lift off the lifting platform. Raise the axle until the initially determined dimension for the unladen position has been reached. You are then able to tighten the coupling rod screws. Mount the gearbox oil lines onto the temperature regulator. Feed the positive battery cable into the vehicle interior and tightly fit the grommet all the way around. Position and secure the line in the outer area. At the point where the line crosses over the longitudinal member, secure the line using 2 cable ties with plug-in sockets. When installing the refrigerant lines, use refrigerant compressor oil to lubricate the new O-ring. Before tightening, the connection must be fully pushed together. At this point, secure the refrigerant line again using the double clamp. Then, attach the coolant hoses. The steps required to reattach the hoses are essentially performed in reverse order to the removal process, which we explained in detail in part 1 of this series of programs. If necessary, use these illustrations as an aid. Caution: the coolant hoses must be pushed on fully up to the stop. Correctly align the installation position in accordance with the marks on the connections and coolant hoses. When attaching the O-type clips, make absolutely sure that they are mounted straight and that they are in the correct installation position. You will find a precise description of this procedure in the workshop manual. If the O-type clips are installed incorrectly, the connections may leak. In the worst-case scenario, the coolant hoses may come loose from the connections when pressure builds up in the cooling system. The double cable tie and the single cable tie should then be attached at these points. As the coolant hoses expand when under pressure, the cable ties should not be tightened too much. Nor must you cut the loose ends of the cable ties too short. Next, connect the pipe hose assemblies that lead to the engine. Lubricate the new O-rings using engine oil and keep the pipe hose assemblies straight when inserting them. Otherwise, there is risk of causing damage to the O-rings. Caution: the connections must be fully pushed up to the stop before the screws are tightened. Otherwise, the connections could come loose. Caution: do not forget the O-ring at this position. If necessary, fix this O-ring in position using a small amount of pure Vaseline. you should also lubricate the new O-ring and the connection using engine oil. Finally, ensure that everything is thoroughly clean and dry. Next, install the pipe hose assembly on the oil reservoir. During this step, it is important to once again work with as much care as when working on the pipe hose assemblies on the engine. Ensure that the area is clean. Lubricate the new O-ring using engine oil. Push the line on as far as the stop, making sure that it's fitted straight. Tighten using the correct torque. Once again, make sure that everything is clean and dry. Before securing the earth wire to the body, make sure that the earth point and the cable shoe, as shown here, are clean and completely free from signs of corrosion. Mount the drive shafts. Install the prop shaft. Please note, at this point it is a good idea to check the R-tronic hydraulic fluid level. As the battery has already been disconnected for a long period of time, the pressure in the hydraulic system will have completely dissipated. One of the prerequisites for checking the hydraulic fluid level is that the hydraulic system is depressurized. Reducing the pressure is normally a time-consuming task. Please note, if this breather hose is not installed on the cap to the reservoir, it must be installed at this point. Next, continue to install the wiring harnesses in the interior. First, position the positive battery cable. Caution: there are two mounting points on the positive battery cable. The cable must be secured to these points in order to ensure that it is fitted correctly. The second mounting point is located near the main fuse box. First, connect the cable in the main fuse box. Then secure the cable to the mounting point as well as the other points. Then continue positioning and connecting the engine gearbox wiring harness. There are a few mounting points that must be observed during this step. The wiring harness must be positioned carefully in order to ensure that no wear points are created. Photos taken during the removal process are helpful for correctly assigning the relay sockets and fuses in the relay carrier. Caution: apart from the fuel pump fuse, all other relays and fuses are reinstalled. As the operating fluids for the engine have not yet been filled, the missing fuse helps to prevent the engine from being started unintentionally. Check under this securing bolt on the relay carrier whether the wiring harness has enough clearance to the screw and to the bracket. Continue to install and secure the lines and hoses under the side panel. Caution: check the rubber bushes before installing the silencer. Damaged bushes should be replaced if required. Are the heat shields all okay? The silencer can then be installed. If necessary, use new O-type clips. When installing the O-type clips, ensure the installation position is correct. Mount the heat shields onto the left and right of the body. Make sure not to overlook these fixing points for the heat shield on the bulb carrier. Connect the vacuum lines to the vacuum units of the exhaust flaps. Secure the secondary air pump in the rear right wheel housing. The impact bar can then be installed. The impact bar is pushed onto the square profile of the longitudinal member. Caution. Because the hollow sections are slightly pushed together when tightened, each of the two securing bolts can only be tightened once using the specified torque. Mount the heat shields onto the body and mount the heat shields for the silencer onto the impact bar. Then position the wiring harness. These two mounting points must be secured to the upper bores. Caution. To secure these mounting points, heat-resistant cable ties must be used. These can be found in the ETKA electronic parts catalogue. At this point, the wiring harness is secured using heat-resistant adhesive tape. Following the same procedure as that used during the removal process, a mechanical door spreader is used to install the rear member. The flange bolts must be screwed in the order shown here before being tightened. Attach the connection for the rear spoiler. Secure the heat shield of the silencer to the rear member and fit the rear lid lock. Install the tail lights. On the left-hand side, secure the cable for the aerial to the tail lights. Fit the perforated sheets. The bumper cover is then fitted. Caution. Check that these 3 spacer pads are present. If they are not, they must be attached before the bumper cover is fitted. Before positioning the bumper cover, attach the electrical connection. When positioning the bumper cover, make sure that the side dowel pins enter the intended bores and ensure they are not damaged. The dowel pins ensure a precise fit between the bumper cover and side panel. The rest of the assembly procedure for the bumper cover is essentially performed in reverse order to the removal procedure. For this reason, we will not provide you with additional illustrations at this point. Mount the center part of the bumper cover. Attach the connectors of the cover and the reversing camera and secure them correctly. Install the number plate lights. At this point, observe the special locking mechanism for the plugs. Connect the battery. Before carrying out any further installation work, carry out an initial functional test. Check that the spoiler is working correctly and that it fits precisely, and examine the gaps. Next, test the reversing camera and the parking sensors. Also, check the function of the rear lid lock by actuating it electrically and by using the manual release. Finally, check all of the rear lighting. Next, install the air filter housing. Please note, the air filter housing and the air filter elements must first be cleaned or replaced if required. Next, insert the boots on the left and right. Remove the hose clips and spray them with rust remover before installation. Install the air filter housing. When connecting the housing, ensure that the hose connections and air pipes are free from oil and grease. The tightening torque of the hose clips depends on their width. Measure the width and find the appropriate tightening torque in the workshop manual. We always want to improve our programs. Please send any suggestions, improvements and suggested topics you may have to audi.service.tv@audi.de.